Welcome back to another episode of Let's Build a Graflex. On today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the soldering of the soundboard and the overall final assembly of our Graflex 2.0. If you've been following along up to this point, you've seen as we modified the inner core. We wired up our main LED, we wired up and built our crystal chamber, along with our speaker, our battery, our switch, and our recharge port here. And today we are finally going to finish this build. And as you can see, we have quite the mess of wires. We're going to go over what each one does and just kind of tidy these up a bit, and we are going to solder them all to the soundboard and get this saber finally up and running, and then we will put it all back together and see how it comes out. So the first thing that you're going to need for this tutorial is you're going to need your soundboard. And as I've said before, for this build I'm using the Nano Biscotti version 3.0 that has built-in flash on clash. If you're using the 2.0, you're going to need the power extender, but those are being phased out and they're very hard to come by, so if you have one, it's kind of rare at this point, but not impossible. But today we're going to be focusing on the version 3. So you're going to want to make sure you have your soundboard. You're also going to need your electric static safe or ESD safe soldering iron. I'm going to be using a pair of helping hands to hold things, maybe even a hobby vise. If you want to use one of those, that'll work too. You're going to need just your little wire snips. I have a couple types here. This one has my excuse me, my wire strippers in the jaws. You're also going to need your Allen wrenches for putting the shrouds back on, for your Allen keys, and those are a 1/16 inch Allen key, as well as your 5/64 socket for the little brass pins, or you can use a pair of needle nose pliers. Whatever works. But for now, we can focus on just getting this soundboard soldered up and getting this thing back together. So let's get into, first of all, let's get into what each wire does, where it goes, and how we're going to figure all this mess out. So first things first is we have this whole mess of wires here. We have quite a few different colors. Some of them are the same. If you've been following along, you should know where each one goes. But if you haven't been, let's go over that real quick right now. So basically we have our soundboard here. And as I said, I'm using the Nano Biscotti version 3.0 by Plector Labs. This is a great little board, very small footprint, very easy installation. Basically what we're going to be focusing on is these 7 pads. So we have all of these wires for our saber, but we only have 7 pads for them to go to. So that really makes it very simple for us, because if you look at the soundboard itself, if my camera will focus back on this, if we look back at the soundboard, we can see that each pad is actually labeled. We have the first pad on the right side that has the positive symbol, so that's going to be our main positive. So all of our red wires are going to go to that. We also have the next pad down, has the negative symbol next to it. And the way I've wired it up is all of my black wires are going to go to that main negative pad. Third one down has an L. That's going to be our main LED pad. That's what we're going to solder our green wires from the negative side of our 2 blue dies on the LED. The fourth one is the flash on clash pad. As you can see, it has this little F next to it. That's going to be our purple wire for the flash on clash of the white die on the LED. The next pad down has the ACT or activation switch, so that's going to be for the brown wire of our activation switch. And the last two just say speaker, so that's just going to be our 2 blues. Doesn't matter which one goes where, as long as power flows from one to the other. The speaker doesn't care, electricity doesn't care. You can solder either one to either pad, it doesn't matter. So now that we know what each pad does, we know that if we look at our, zoom out a little bit, we can look at our wiring diagram again, and we have all of the same exact wires that we have on our board in our build, and they're all going to go to one of these pads. So we can see here that the red and black wires are going to get multiple wires connected to them. The only difference between this wiring diagram and the way that I'm going to do it is the fact that I have my red wire for my crystal chamber LED here wired to my deep sleep pad. I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to tie it right in with the main red, and the green wire is actually going to be a black wire connected to the main battery negative. So my positive and negative pads are going to get 3 wires, and each of my remaining pads are only going to get 1 wire. So it really makes this very simple, and that's why I've chosen excuse me, that's why I've chosen each wire color the way that I have, so that I know that all my positives, all the ones going to my positive pad are red, all the ones going to my negative pad are black, and each other pad gets its own individual color. So it really makes it very simple when trying to figure out which wire does what and which one goes where, because when you look at just a rat's nest like this, it can be kind of daunting. But now we know which one does what and which goes where, so now we can get on with simply soldering it together. One thing to note, however, is that this is the layout for the wiring if the soundboard was to be installed like this. Unfortunately, in order to install it in this chassis, it has to be reversed because that's how it's going to slide into the chassis, so that the SD card slot is accessible through the window. It has to be installed technically upside down. So that just means that our wires are going to be a little reversed. So instead of our positive being up here and positive negative, LED, flash on clash, activation switch, and speakers, it's going to be positive, negative, LED, flash on clash, activation switch, and speakers running this way. So we just have to keep that in mind, that compared to the wiring diagram here, these are going to be reversed. So if you're following along, if you've seen my wiring diagram online before and you've printed it out, and you have your soundboard installed, it's going to be the reverse pattern of this, simply because the soundboard is upside down. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this. Don't solder your power wires up here to the speaker pads and things like that, because it will not work. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to the crystal chamber LEDs, there are quite a few ways you can wire these up to get them to work. You can wire multiple LEDs, you can wire them to a number of different places to get them to do different things. It's really up to you how you want to do it. One of the ways you can do it is the way that I'm doing it today. I'm going to take just my power and negative wires for the LED, and I'm just going to go off of the power and negative pads. Now what that is going to do is every time that the kill key is removed, the crystal chamber will light up. It will not have any of the blade functions, meaning there's no flicker or shimmer effect. It will be on whether the blade is on or off, and that's just the way that this one is going to be built. If you wanted it to mimic the main blade, you would take power from the main pad and connect the negative to the LED pad, in which case I would give it a green wire negative, meaning that it's going to the green pad, just to keep it straight in my mind. Now you can also take power from a couple different places. You don't have to take it directly from the positive pad up top here. You can actually take it from this tiny little, if you look here, it says DS pad, this tiny little dot above this black box, which is the motion control unit, or the MCU. This tiny little pad right here is the deep sleep pad. If you solder to that, it puts out a 3.3 volt output, and you can solder to that, and when the board goes into deep sleep, it will cut power to that circuit. You can also use this bigger pad up top here, which is the accent LED pad. Is also a 3.3 volt output, but the problem with that one is whether the board is in deep sleep or not, the circuit is always activated. So your LED will always be on unless you manually put in the kill key and cut power to the whole board. this circuit will always be live. The benefit of these two pads is since they're only 3.3 volt output, you really don't need to use a resistor. Whereas if you use this positive pad, it puts out the full 3.7 volt output from the battery. So if you use this pad, you're going to need a resistor, and you're going to need to calculate the resistor based off of the specifications of the accent LED that you will be using. Now, since I am going off of this positive pad, I have figured out which resistor I need to use, and I've soldered it right down here. Soldered it in line with the accent LED positive wire, and I've heat shrunk the connections. I actually put a little piece of heat shrink over the resistor itself to keep it protected. I'm just going to tuck this down next to the recharge port. It'll stay nice and safe. It's not going to go anywhere. If you want to zip tie it to one of the other wires or to something else to keep it from moving around, you can do that too. But I'm just going to leave mine just like that. It'll be nice and tight. Nothing's going to happen to it. I believe this one is a 22 ohm 1/8 watt resistor, just to keep the LED protected from the full 3.7 volts of the battery, or 4.2 if the battery has a full charge. But if you, like I said, if you go off of the deep sleep pad or the 3.3 accent LED pad, you don't really need to worry about a resistor since the voltage output of those pads are so low. But for this tutorial, I thought I'd make it a little easier for people to follow along. If you're new to soldering, as you can see, this board is very small. And that deep sleep pad, if my camera will focus again, as you can see, this screwdriver is very small. My fingers are not that big, and that deep sleep pad is very tiny. And if you get too much solder or too much heat and you damage your motion control unit, your board will not function properly. The 3.3 accent pad is a little bit bigger, but it's still awfully small, and it's right in between some delicate components. So just to make it a little easier if you're new to soldering, I'd recommend just doing the calculation and getting the extra resistor and going off of the main pad here. It will make your life a lot easier, and it's just what I'm going to do for this particular build. So if you were wondering about the crystal chamber LED and things like that, that's how I'm going to do it. You don't have to do it that way. You can do it a number of different ways. You can even use more than one LED. You can have one that lights up when the saber is turned on. You can have another one that lights up when the blade comes on and shares the shimmer and flicker effects, and then you can even wire up another one to the flash on clash pad so that the crystal chamber flashes with the blade. You can wire up as many as you want in a number of different ways. This is just the simple way that I'm going to do it with just one LED. Okay, so I have my circuit board installed in my, well, not installed, but clamped in my helping hands. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit of solder on each of these pads and get them pre-tinned. Now, as you can see, I am using the back side because there's the SD card. There's no point in pre-tinning the other side, the top side, because we're not going to be soldering onto that. So I have it flipped around, and I'm just going to pre-tin these. I'm just going to go very quick. We're going to get this done fairly quickly. No reason to really take too much time to do this. So I'm just going to put just a dab of solder on the tip of the soldering iron, and I'm just going to go from one to the other. I'm just going to put a little heat to it. I'm just going to put a little dab of solder, and as you can see, that one's pretty good. It fills in the hole a little bit. Next one. Oh, a little more on that one. That one's pretty good. Oh. That one's good. Solder stuck to it a little bit. That one's not bad. A little more. There we go. Next one. And last one. Good. So as you can see, whoops, those are all nice and pre-tinned. Nice little bit of solder on each one. I may go back and see some of these smaller ones, not smaller, but where there wasn't quite as much, where it kind of sunk into the hole a little bit, like that one, that one a little bit. I may go back and add a little bit to that. That one looks very good. where it's nice and sitting on top. None of the connections are touching. You never want your solder connections crossing from one pad to the other, because that will create a short between the two pads. You always want to make sure that there's a nice gap in between them when you're soldering onto these pads. Otherwise you could damage something, especially if you cross one of your activation switches, or if you cross any of them and create a short between them, it's not going to work well. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that back in helping hands, and as you can see, if my camera will refocus, there we go. As you can see, I've barely got this clamped in here, and I'm not clamped on to anything that the jaws can damage. I'm not clamped on anywhere to any of the components or anything like that. I'm simply on the board itself. It's nice and safe, nice and protected. If you want to use a hobby vise, that will work as well. Just clamp it right in the hobby vise. Just clamp it down. That'll work too. Okay, so I've got my soundboard all pre-tinned. I've got it lined up. I'm going to solder it right over here. I think that's going to work the best. Now all these wires are going to come out. They're going to get soldered on. I might even slide this forward a little bit, but you want to have a little extra slack so it can you can maneuver it down into where it's going to go. If you're comfortable doing it inserted in the chassis, you can do that too. It's just a little difficult to get the soldering iron in there and get all the wires down and everything like that. So it may just be a little tricky for you if you're just starting out. So I'm just going to demonstrate a different way to do it. If you do it that way, you will have less slack in your wire, which you may prefer. But I'm just going to clamp it in nice and secure. And I might slide it forward a little bit. I might have it about like that. But either way, before we do this, what we're going to want to do is we're going to solder all of our light colors together. As you can see, I've got my red wires here, and I've got my board, and we're just going to measure these out. I'm going to cut them about here. I'm going to cut them a little long. Like I said, I'd rather have too much than too little. I'm going to cut those, and then I'm going to cut the sheathing off, and just the same amount of sheathing, and we'll come back when I have them all clamped and ready to go. Okay, so I've got these all clamped together. I've got them all cut and cut the sheathing back, and as you can see, I have them all in the jaws of my helping hands, and I've got them twisted together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tin them together so that they stay. Clean my soldering iron a bit, and again, I'm just going to slide a piece of paper under it in case any solder drips. Protects the chassis, protects anything else under there. Okay, so there we go. We've got these 3 red wires all soldered together. I can pull those out. Check the solder joint. Seems good, seems nice and tight. Nothing's coming apart. So we're going to call that one good. We can put that off to the side, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to do the 3 blacks as well. Okay, I've gone ahead and soldered my 3 black wires together. As you can see here, my 3 blacks are all soldered together very nicely. I've also taken the liberty of cutting all my other wires to the appropriate lengths. They're all cut to the same length, basically. And I cut back the sheathing on each of them, and I pre-tinned each of them. So all of these wires are ready to go. I've got my circuit board flipped around so the SD card slot is up. I've got my red wires in the helping hands here, and we can go ahead and we can just hopefully very quickly solder these all to the board. So let me just zoom in here a little bit, get this nice in frame. Now you'll notice that I have a little bit of extra wire hanging over the edge. I'm probably going to end up cutting that off, but the important thing is I have all my wires equal length. I have the same amount of sheathing showing, and I have my sheathing butted right up to the circuit board. You don't want extra bare wire hanging over the edge. You don't want your sheathing way back here. That has the potential to bend. It's not a sturdy joint because without as much sheathing there, the wire is very flexible. It can bend easily. You can have extra wire come over from another one and contact each other. You want your sheathing to go right up to the solder joint to keep it nice and strong, nice and secure. Now I have my wire resting right against my pad here. It's resting on top. The wire has been pre-tinned. The pad has been pre-tinned. So this should go together fairly smoothly. I'm just going to pre-tin my soldering iron a little bit. I'm going to just touch the heat to it, melt the pad, get some nice heat transfer. I think that looks not bad. We'll find out. Disconnect that. Yep, it's a nice sturdy joint that's not going anywhere. Now, like I said, I do have quite a bit of excess wire hanging off the edge here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to trim that. Trim that up. Overall, that joint isn't bad at all. Got a little piece. Nope, thought I did. But that is a nice, strong, secure solder joint. Not bad at all. So now, I can go ahead, reset this here. I'm just going to move right on down the line. I'm going to do my black ones. Again, lay these right over the pad. Just like that, with the sheathing going right up to the edge of the solder joint. And we have our negative all soldered together. There's a little break there. There's a little interruption, but we are back, and I've got this all soldered on, so now we can continue with the rest of our wire colors. So, looking at our wiring diagram here, let me zoom out a little bit. Looking at our wiring diagram and looking at the specs for the board, we have our positive, negative. The next up is going to be our green for our LED, then purple for flash on clash, then brown for activation, and then finally our two blues. So now we can go ahead and we can grab our green wire and solder it to our main LED pad. Now, as I said, I already have all of these wires pre-tinned. Make sure you do that. Another good practice that I do is I keep the kill key inserted in the recharge port, and I kill power going from the battery, so this board will never be live so long as the kill key is inserted. But you also never ever want to solder to the board with the SD card in place. Always, always, always make sure that you remove the SD card before you solder onto the board. Very important step. So now I can just line up my green wire. The rest of these will be much more simple to solder since they're only one wire. These other two, where there's multiple wires going to it, can be a little tricky at first. But the rest of these should be fairly simple since we only have one wire. So the pad is pre-tinned. Just pre-tin my soldering tip a little bit. And we're good to go. So that's our green wire down. Now we can move on to our purple for the flash on clash. Now this one you're going to want to be careful of this little unit here. You don't want to have your solder joint go too far and hit that. So my wire is actually a little bit long. So I'm just going to cut off just a piece. Just a hair. So when I lay this across, it doesn't come in contact with it. Something like that. Just do the same practice as before. apply a little bit of heat. Melt these together, just like that. Test the joint. Good. My green one, I didn't test that one, but that one's good. So now we want the brown activation switch wire. Apply just a little bit of heat. A little bit of solder. Looks pretty good. That's a nice sturdy joint. So the last thing we have is our 2 blue wires for our speaker. Now, like I said, when it comes to the speaker wires, it doesn't matter which one goes where, which one goes to what pad. It absolutely does not matter. And that is it. We now have our completed circuit board. So now what we can go ahead and do, we can remove, without inserting anything, without putting anything together officially, you know, permanently, without sliding the circuit board into place or putting any shrouds or anything like that on. What we can do is we can take our SD card as it comes. Now, like I said in one of my previous videos, these SD cards do come preloaded with 2 sound fonts, both light meat and dark meat for the light side and the dark side. You can interchange these with different fonts if you'd like, but for right now we're just going to test this with a basic sound font installed. And this just installs. As you can see, it spring clicks, so it just pulls right out. Push it in, and what we're going to do is we're just going to twist our kill key and see what happens. And we have our boot sound. Our crystal chamber lights up. So now we can just use our activation switch here to see what happens. As you can see, we have our main LED, we have our swing sounds, and we have our flash on clash. Just like that. Our crystal chamber is still illuminated. What we can do is we can switch to the different font, hold the switch down. Now we're on font 2. And this is our dark meat font. As you can see, for dark meat, these swing sounds are much quieter. So this has been a success. Our saber now works. We can twist the kill key just to kill power again. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove this SD card for the time being. So that's awesome. We now know that this saber works. So what we can do now is we can simply do the final assembly. Okay, now when it comes to final assembly, you're going to want to take your time when inserting your soundboard and everything. You're going to want to take your time, do it very carefully, do it right. You don't want to break anything at this point. You're in the home stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and just, for safety, I'm just going to remove my SD card, put that off to the side. Now, we have all this extra wire here that made it more, easier for us to solder our soundboard in. So what we can do is we can actually pull our chassis out a little bit, which isn't going to do any damage. We can go ahead, we can insert our soundboard, keeping, making sure we don't put any excess stress on these solder joints. You don't want to break anything. We can slide our soundboard. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. We can slide our soundboard into place. There we go. You can begin to push it all the way in. begin to push the front end down. Now you'll notice these wires are all bunched up right now. Mainly our blacks and our reds, they go to the recharge port and the crystal chamber LED. So what we can do is you can push down on them like this, or you can go from the back side here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my small screwdriver. I'm just going to reach in. I'm just going to hook the wires a little bit. I'm just going to pull them down so that my black and reds here, not the ones going to the battery, because those will ride in this channel. Those will stay nice and smooth. But the other ones, I'll have all that extra slack down here where you're never going to see it. You're never going to see on top of the soundboard or under here anyway. And all the excess wire for the other wires will be tucked back behind the speaker. But for these two, we're just going to grab these from down here and we'll just tuck these below. Okay, so I have all my wires, my red and black wires, pulled down through. As you can see, they're resting much more naturally down there. My board is pretty much fully inserted where it's going to go, nice and kind of held in place there. But as you can see, we have all this excess wire up top that rides in this channel, and as we close this, we have a lot of excess here. So what you're going to want to do is I use a small screwdriver. I'm going to pull this wire out of this window here. As you can see, as I do, it pulls the wire there. You can see the red wire got pulled tighter. So now I can do the same with the green wire. You don't want to damage the wire. You do want to do this carefully. So this is actually my green and my purples. Just do it very carefully. Do it just a little at a time. Grab my switch wires here. As you can see, you pull them. They do get tighter here. I'll slide my battery wires out of the way. I'm going to very gently grab my speaker wires. This is really one of the most finicky parts of this build. It's because this chassis is so tight and has so little room inside of it that this is why this really isn't a beginner's build. This is definitely more of an intermediate build. But as you can see, my wires are getting much nicer. So we can actually take this and we can very slowly start to insert the chassis to where it's going to be. But as you can see, we have a lot of wire here that's bunching up inside. That's why we're going to want to take this, pull it out through here. And pull as you slide your chassis in. And as you do, you'll have your positive and negatives from the battery wire. Your thick ones here that we soldered about here, those will bunch up and you just want to continue pulling those out through the bottom. These wires to the battery are so thick, we don't really want to pull those out through here, and because there's not a lot of room to shove them back in. So we can just take those as we do this. We can just shove them down through here. So as you can see, I have my wires pulled through here. I have some that are tucked down in here from the positive and negative from the battery. And we can just slide this together. And then keeping these nice and tight, keeping the slack out of them, we can go ahead and very gently, with just enough force, we can slide this all the way together. You can double check, make sure everything's tight. Pull the last little bit of slack out of the wire. Okay. Again, make sure everything's tight. You can look down in and make sure that your solder joints are nice and secure. You can look through the back side. Make sure everything's tight. You can look through here if I can get it on camera. Probably not. You can look down through the holes. Make sure your solder joints are good. Make sure your wires are nice and properly routed. But now we have everything pretty much set to go. What you want to do is you want to take all this excess, and it's going to go behind the speaker. So now I'm just going to take it, just very gently tuck this wire down and behind the speaker, which is another reason, well, really the main reason why I recommended the premium speaker, is because it does have this slimmer profile, which is nice when doing this part of the build. Now, if you can manage to do this without having as much slack, that would obviously work the best. The less slack, the less wire you have to hide. It all depends on how you route the wires and how you can make it work. So right now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to focus on getting all these wires nice and gently. You don't want to pinch anything. You don't want to crush any of the wires. You don't want to kink any of them. Just get them nice and tucked down out of the way and get them hidden. And just do kind of one bundle at a time, working it in. Get it nice and tucked out of the way. Use your little screwdriver, being very careful not to cut the wire or anything like that. You're just using it. Sometimes your fingers are just a little too big to get into tight spaces. There we go. We've got our wires nice and neatly tucked, just like that. As you can see, if we look at it from the side, from the profile shot, we don't have any wires sticking up, nothing to get pinched if we, when we put the lower half on, nothing to get pinched or cut or anything like that. They're nice and tucked down in. So now we can go ahead and just insert our SD card one more time. Pull out the, or twist I should say, the kill key. As we can see, we still get light, we got our boot up sound, and we still have light. Now, inserted in the chassis, it is going to be a little more delicate. A little harder to activate the flash on clash. And you'll notice that maybe we get some false swings. The false swings are most likely due to the fact that the battery is not at a full charge. You'll get that a lot in plector boards. Even though the battery will say, if you test the battery, I've tested them before and they say like 3.6 volts. That's still not a full charge, so you may get false swings. If you put your saber together and you get some false swings, don't panic. Simply charge your battery for a few hours and test it again and see how it works. So before we start putting this all together, we're actually going to make sure that our recharge port is properly assembled. So I just pulled the kill key out, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my charger here. Got my charger from Solo's Hold. I'm going to plug it into the wall outlet. I'm going to plug my port into my recharge port. Now what should happen is my LED should go out, and I should not have any power. I should not be able to turn the saber on. If I plug this in and I'm still able to get power, then that means that I've wired my negatives up improperly, but I don't believe I have. So we'll plug this right in. As you can see, my LED goes out. I do not have power. My switch is dead. My switch doesn't do anything. So that tells me that the recharge port has cut power from the battery to the board, and I am now sending my full 4.2 volts directly to the battery. And if I remove the port or remove the charger, we get the boot up sound and everything lights back up. So we know that that part is also good. So now I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall my kill key, cutting power. So now we can continue assembling the rest of our saber, which is really kind of the easy part. So let's go ahead and finish this up. Okay, when you go ahead and, or I should say when you're ready to assemble the rest of it, you're going to need a few tools. You're just going to need your 1/16 Allen wrench. I'm going to be using my 5/64 or number 8 socket driver that I've modified to be a little deeper for the brass pins. So what we can do is the first thing you want to do is just take your shroud with the bunny ears and everything. I don't have anything attached to it. We're going to slide this on. Again, our wire channel is at the top, so we can just slide that into place. Route our switch wire through the slot in the side. That'll go on. And that'll stop right about there. But as you can see, that's not properly lined up. What we can do to kind of keep this in place is we can go ahead and just attach our fake little switch cover here. It has a little dot on it. Usually I put the dot facing forward. It's not entirely screen accurate to have this little cover here. Usually in an actual Graflex it's a real switch. If you have the Vader's Vault 1-inch kit, this will be a tactile auxiliary switch. But we're just going to go ahead and thread this in. And this will just help to keep the shroud in place. Tighten this down. If you want to put just a small dab of Loctite on this at this point, because hopefully the screw won't be coming back out. Hopefully we're done at this point. If you want to put a little dab of Loctite on that, you should be good to do that. I'm going to go ahead and put my beer tab on. Now I've said in the previous videos, the beer tab has this little spacer on the stud, and you have your screw stud, which doesn't have any flats on it. It's just smooth, so that just goes down through the top with the spacer on the bottom. And that is going to line up with this top hole here. You're just going to thread that on by hand. Now the trick with this one is, and I've said it before and I will do it one more time, you can tighten this. You can tighten this top part, which is difficult to do because there's no hex head or Allen key or anything like that, but you can twist it as tight as it'll go while twisting the beer tab, and that'll allow it to get pretty well snug. As you can see, this beer tab is now nice and tight, but this might still loosen up, so you want to put this one on first. You want to tighten this down as best you can, and then, now that we have this one done, what we're going to do is we're going to thread this bottom one in. And what's going to happen is when we tighten this bottom one in, it is going to pull our inner core. It is going to pull the inner core down, which is going to pull this screw down, which is going to put tension on it and keep it from loosening up. So if you were to tighten this first and then tighten this, this top one always has the possibility of loosening up, whereas if you tighten this one as best you can first and then tighten this one down, it will put even more pressure on this one, keeping it from coming out. So I'm just going to tighten that a fair amount of pressure. And that's about it. So now I'm just going to go ahead and put my brass pins in. Turn it over and do the other side. So now that we have our brass pins installed, we can go ahead and we might as well install our blade retention screws. Now, as I've said, because I'm using the Graflex clamp switch holder, both of these will function as blade retention screws, and I have here just a couple from the Custom Saber Shop. You can get the ones from graflexshop.com as well. They're virtually the same thing. They are a three-piece design with the top portion here that threads onto the bottom portion with the stud, and the red button is a separate piece. They simply thread together. I've glued the red buttons down so they don't... it's a non-functioning switch, I should say that. Even when you get them brand new, they don't function as a button, so I don't really know why they're a multi-piece. But you can modify them to work as a functioning button if you like the look of these better. They are more screen accurate with the darker red button, but for this build we're just going to be using them both as blade retention screws. So we can just go ahead and thread these on. And that's the nice thing about the Graflex 2.0 is that the inner core is threaded so that both the top and the bottom can hold a blade retention screw, just as the shroud is both sides are threaded so that it can take the standard short thread screw button housing, such as the original one where the functioning red button, these are a very short thread, and the shroud on both top and bottom are threaded to accept these, so you can use whatever you want. But we're just going to be using that. So now our shroud is done. Our shroud is fully installed and all set to go. Next up is we're going to do the clamp. Now I've already done my clamp, put the Mylar tape on. I modified it so this can spin without having to disassemble it and squeeze the two halves together. And like I said before, with your Graflex clamp switch holder, it really makes it impossible to squeeze this together far enough to the way you normally have to loosen this clamp. So with the mod I've done, I can now loosen that as I see fit. So I'm just going to slide my clamp over the back side, slide it into place with the clamp lever facing down always, with the slot as it lines up with our screw hole here. Now the tricky part with this is simply getting our wire. Let me zoom in here. The plastic for the switch holder is 3D printed, so it is quite flexible. Let me get some better light. It is quite flexible, as you can see. It does spread very easily, but as we get to the deeper section, it doesn't spread as well. So you may have a hard time getting the switch wires to go through, but it is possible to do. You just need to be gentle with it. Slide the switch wires into the middle like so. And this is why I angled the tab on my switch wire. I angled it back because the switch will sit forward and it'll just allow the wire to angle back to the switch hole in the inner core a little easier. If you find that getting the switch in the switch holder can be a bit of a pain, you can go ahead and disassemble the clamp. You can just unthread the lever here and disassemble it and slide the clamp off, and that'll allow you to put the switch in the switch holder by itself. Now you'll notice that this is a little spread apart, the ears here, and that's simply because the the heat shrink around the joints is just a little thick, but we have nothing to worry about because the clamp will keep this together. It'll keep the switch nice and tight. Nothing's damaged, nothing is going anywhere, so you don't really have anything to worry about as far as damaging it. So now we can go ahead, we can just slide our clamp back into place. If you want to install your screw at this time, you can go ahead and do that to keep the clamp from going anywhere. Just thread that in. Keep it a little loose so you can still spin it and line everything up. But we can do that just to keep it from going back and forth. So now we have our threaded section with our threaded nut welded on the back. That goes over on that side. We have our modified side, which if you've watched my previous videos, I modified the hole, just rounded out the top and bottom to allow the lever to spin. And we can slide our lever through, line everything up. The threads. Here we go. And just like that. This will pinch together. It will hold the clamp switch in place. It'll look great. So now that we have that, I'm actually going to loosen this just a little bit, just a few turns, to make sure that it's nice and loose when I install the lower half. So now that we have the clamp installed, we can go ahead and take our lower half, and as I've said before, it simply slides into place over the chassis. Make sure your clamp switch holder is lifted up. Slide it right into place. And go ahead and thread it right on. Now, as I showed in my other tutorial for basic assembly, me being finicky, I like everything to line up. I like everything to look screen accurate, and in order to do that, the grips and the D-ring both line up with the clamp itself. So I've gone ahead. What you can do is tighten this all the way down and then back this off until your grip lines up. And I've already made sure that my pommel, when it's tight, it basically lines up with this grip. You may find that yours lines up kind of over here in the middle, in which case what you can do is you can just put a little dab of Loctite on the threads of the pommel, and then you can back it off to the nearest grip, and then wait for the Loctite to set, and it'll kind of lock it in place. It will make it difficult for you to use the pommel because you'll have to kind of mess with it each time you want to take it on and off. And then you simply, once you have the D-ring lined up with the closest grip, then you just back off the bottom half until your grip lines up with your clamp. So now everything is nice and aligned, just like that. And we can test and see, we close the clamp, that's a little loose. That's still going to spin, so we can tighten this kind of one turn, clamp it down. That's still loose. We're basically using the clamp now to tighten the lower half and lock it in place so it's not simply spinning all over the place. So we can see that is actually fairly tight. So we're going to call that good for now. The next thing we can do is, if I can zoom out here, whoop, wrong way, zoom out, what we're going to want to do is sight down the saber. We're going to want to line up our clamp so that it's about 90 degrees from the top, from the bunny ears. You can do it this way too. You can sight down the back side of it. Just line up the clamp. You can look through the space here and see the notch in the shroud, which is also 90 degrees. You can line it up like that, and then tighten your screw down to lock the clamp in place. Give it a good little snug, and now we can line the grip up again with the clamp, just like that. Our D-ring is nice and lined up, and it's coming together. So one of the last steps we're going to do is we're going to install our clamp card. Our clamp card is going to sit about like this. Push our switch down. We're going to close this up. As you can see, our clamp card is still a little loose. Our bottom half is pretty snug, so what I'm going to try and do first is I'm just going to try and tighten this clamp a little more. And as you can see, my bottom half is now incredibly tight. The clamp card is not going anywhere. That's nice and tight. Everything is pretty good. So now I can remove the pommel. My SD card is still inserted. I can go ahead and just twist. My crystal chamber lights up. I can use my clamp card as the activation switch. Just like that. You can thread our pommel back on if you want to get the full sound effect, to see how it sounds excuse me, with the pommel on. Of course, it is vented for sound. We can try this again. You can see it's plenty loud. Just like that. So the last thing that we're going to do, now that we have this all done, all assembled, is we are going to choose a blade plug. Now I have a couple different styles here. The blade plug basically just sits in the inner core, and it just takes the place of the blade when there's no blade in it, so it looks a little better. There's a couple different styles you can choose from. Actually, there's a lot of styles you can choose from. If you're using these standard inner core, you're going to need a 7/8 inch blade plug, and blade for that matter. I have here a KR Sabers 7/8 inch Graflex blade plug. This is the older style. He does have a newer style coming out, shipping pretty soon, that has a larger diameter and more protruding brass plug, which is more common of a vintage Graflex. And what you do is you simply unscrew your blade retention screws and slide your blade plug into place. Now the thing you may notice when you do this is it goes in rather snug, and that is because the brass pins, so I'm actually going to use my needle nose to get this back out because it goes in snug, especially with this style where it's hard to get down in there. You're going to want to make sure your blade plug falls in and falls out very easily. The problem with this saber is that, as you can see, if you look down inside, the brass pins actually stick out just a little bit, just a hair, literally probably less than a millimeter. They protrude. Now you can either use some sandpaper or a Dremel, and you can sand those down so they're nice and smooth. You can use whatever you'd like, and that will allow the blade plug, and the blade for that matter, to slide in a little more easily. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to use my Dremel to file those down a little bit. So I've gone ahead and I've shaved down the insides of the brass plugs, and the easiest way I found to do that, you can take them out and you can shave them down by hand, but I just took my Dremel, and as you can see, I just wore down just a little bit on both sides, and what this does is it just shaves down the brass pins so that you know it's nice and flush, and it shaves down the area around the brass pins where the threading is, to make sure that that is also nice and flush, nice and smooth. So now I've modified my blade plug here. They come in different lengths. I got this one with the longest length, which I think was like 2 inches or something like that, but I didn't know exactly how deep my LED was going to sit, because I want this to butt right up against the LED. I don't want it to be too short and go in too far or anything like that, so I want it to butt right up against it. So I got this long, and I just cut this to fit, so we can drop this in. Now with the Graflex, you got to pinch the bunny ears to get this ring to open up, and it'll drop right in. As you can see, the way I've cut this is it sits nice and flush. It sticks up just a hair, but it's supposed to sit nice and flush with the top of the inner core. And we can tighten these down so that it doesn't come out. It puts pressure on the blade material of the blade plug. That's no longer coming out. And then we can go ahead and turn it on. And as you can see, it's a nice feature to have. So it's not just a gaping hole in your saber when you don't have a blade installed. And it just looks really nice, and it looks pretty cool. Another style is, I got this one from Harp Design, Harp Lightsaber Design, based in China, I believe. And this one is solid plastic. It's not a blade material. It's got this metal ring on the top with the thick brass plug that is glued down in, and rather than having the outside edge light up like the KR Sabers one, the inside ring lights up, and this one isn't as bright because this solid plastic absorbs and blocks most of the light. I have another one here that I have in my personal Graflex. As you can see, the plug sits a lot higher. The brass plug insert sits a lot higher. If I turn this one on, as you can see, it doesn't light up as much. It is brighter in person. The camera kind of dulls it a little bit, but it lights up, and it's not overpoweringly bright, and it's just a different design. There are a lot of companies out there that make blade plugs. Vader's Vault makes a lot of them. You can get some on Etsy. You can get some on Shapeways, 3D printed ones. You can get all different styles, all different sizes. You don't have to go for a Graflex authentic blade plug. Some people do. They just like to have the more completed build. But that is the KR one. And it's just a nice finishing touch for when your saber is all done. So now we can open this up. Now what I'm going to do is that's a little tight, so I'm just going to open this a little more, and that's a little better. As you can see, our crystal chamber is still nice and illuminated. Tighten this down. Make sure that our clamp card doesn't go anywhere. Nice and secure. And our Graflex with crystal chamber reveal is finished. Again, I'm getting some false swings, I think probably because the battery is so low. I will charge this battery up and make sure that that's the cause of it. So thank you again for watching my video series, Let's Build a Graflex. Our saber is now finished. There will be one more episode if you'd like to stay tuned for that. And in that episode we will be focusing on how to alter the files in the SD card. I will show you how to download and change sound fonts, as well as modify some of the configuration files in the SD card for your swing effects, clash effects, things like that. We'll go down the list and go over each one. But a lot of people are confused as to how to change sound fonts, and it's a very easy process. And we'll go over all of that in the next video. So until next time, thank you for watching.